When I was young, I made exactly the same mistake. I was thinking, I will pick up the best audio engineer, I will ask what is the best compressor, and I will be using it. It's a crazy mistake. Make sure you understand this crazy video has 3 different topics. The battle between compressors and what is the best compressor and why. Crazy deep examples how you exactly should learn compressors. I'm gonna give you an example of Fairchild. History, application, settings nobody understands properly. Frequency response measurement, harmonic content measurement. An application in real projects. It will be a battle between all these snake oil plugins which authentically emulated. And crazy example why many projects actually don't allow you to choose the best compressor. Hi Andrew, Hi Andrew. Hi guys, it's Andrew from Canada with one of the best music production and sound mixing courses. The idea of my course is not only full-blown education on all subjects of audio engineering, but the core idea is myth busting, because this field is very snake oil. If you don't want to be misled and waste your next 10 years, you want to learn the top-notch stuff and very unique stuff, this course is for you. It's a free and small part of lesson number 20. Free videos on this channel is just to get you interested. Real education is all 80 full-blown lessons, or you can choose the group of lessons. The information about my credits, 240 all 5 stars reviews and all 5 stars 150 reviews verified by Google, you can find in the description or in the first pinned comment. Also my contacts where you can ask any questions. And the information how to participate in my course. Right now on the screen you can see timestamps for those 3 topics I announced in the beginning of this video. All 3 topics are very different. Make sure if you watch one, second one can be completely different and you can find a gem in one of those. Also the timestamps you can find in the description. Fairchild, it's another legend. People claim it's a godfather of all compressors. It's 1950 exactly. So this is how this compressor looked like. The most known model, 670. The story of this compressor is very interesting. Basically, when after World War II, there was a Nuremberg trial where they judged Nazis after World War II, right? It was initiated originally by Soviet Union, but Americans accommodated everything and kind of like managed this trial. The trial was lasting for pretty long period of time, like 1 year or something, you know. And there was prosecutors and defenders, interrogations, talks, answers, questions. Somebody needed to record it. They hired a Soviet Union audio engineer who recorded all this. And this guy, after Nuremberg trial, escaped Soviet Union, so he ran away to the US and he created this compressor basically. I believe he was Lithuanian, and when he ended up in the US, there was a guy, investor, who actually was almost like a godfather of photo cameras. You know, basically the guy who invested in development of cameras in early 20th century, and you know, because of that guy, actually these photo cameras started to be like widespread, so he was one of the most important people who influenced cameras. And the same investor actually invested in this compressor. Just imagine. So this investor basically allowed this Soviet Union engineer to like develop and create the most known and fundamental compressor, which eventually started to be a godfather for all other compressors. So one guy basically allowed to develop camera field and audio production field at the same time. This compressor is absolutely phenomenal. First of all, it has 20 tubes. Just imagine, 20. If you need to exchange these tubes, you need to have a fortune to buy new tubes. Especially, as you understand, it's not modern production tubes or something. You're probably gonna find some sort of similar performance tubes. Just because of a lot of people think it has 20 tubes, it's probably super warm and super big and everything. But actually no. As it has a lot of saturation, this compressor becomes dark and warm, but not too dark and not as dark as somebody would expect, you know. It still put a lot of like high sparkle and everything, so this compressor actually relatively balanced, but definitely with a warmer bottom end, you know. Technology used in this compressor also unique, not just like most compressors have. For example, the term is real-time vocal rebiasing. Vocal, I don't mean vocalist, I mean it's just technical term. You know, for example, when you have a guitar amplifier like I have in my second studio, like let's say Marshall Super Lead hand-wired, 1959 Marshall Super Lead. Or I have something like Victory amplifiers, Wizard. Over here in this studio I have Angle Powerball 2 below my compressors over there. When you change tubes, you need to rebias the voltage, you know what I mean? But you do it once manually, you know, to make your tubes working right. But on this compressor, this process actually happens to achieve compression. It's crazy. So it's basically real-time automatic rebiasing for the voltage to make this compressor work. Crazy. Due to this very unique technology, this compressor sounds super natural. You know, it has super natural sounds, very natural dynamics, it has feedback circuitry, so it's another feedback style compressor. We're gonna mention it here. Let's put this compressor on the vocal and let's start learning this compressor, and then we're gonna compare plugins. Again, I'm not gonna say that Fairchild by Universal Audio would be the best plugin or something, but I'm gonna use their plugin just because of it looks very similar to real. You know, Universal Audio is always pretty good in making like visual. So first of all, I want to mention that attack time on this compressor is always very short. There is 6 time constant settings. Time constant, what it really means, it means attack and release parameter. So you have this position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In each position, you either have very crazy short attack 0.2 milliseconds or 0.8. In some positions, due to tolerance potential, it can be up to 2 milliseconds, but I have doubts. I just mentioned over here up to 2 seconds. I'm gonna put it in brackets like this because I cannot advocate this particular amount. Usually, or at least according to the manual, it's either 0.2 milliseconds or 0.8. So I'm gonna put 0.8 in brackets. It's those ranges where you still say 0.2 milliseconds is super instantaneous attack. And 0.8 is still pretty instantaneous attack, you know. But what really happens over here, it's all about release time. I put this information here, I just copy and paste from my other notes to speed up. Position 1, 300 milliseconds. As you can see, there is nothing like 50 milliseconds like on 1176 Distressor or something like this. It's still very long release relatively. 300 milliseconds, I would say it's a medium release time. It's not short at all. 300 milliseconds, and you would be surprised, it's actually the shortest you can get on this compressor. As you know, the problem with long release time commonly it's a residual compression. If you have, let's say, medium note, then quiet note, and then let's say loud note, you put a threshold on your compressor like this. You're gonna compress, let's say, by 5 dB for the first note, and you have, let's say, very long release. Release time should stop or should minimize amount of compression before the second note, but it still has very, very long release, which means it would compress second note a lot anyway. But second note's supposed to be compressed just a little bit, not medium or something. So you're gonna overcompress the second note, and you're still gonna have a lot of compression have left for the third note. But third note, much higher than the threshold. So it's supposed to be compressed on its own by a lot, but you still have extra compression. So you potentially may completely overcompress the third note. Eventually your performance will be like this. Proper compression for the first note, a bit too much for the second note, and maybe completely too much for the third note. Eventually, you're not gonna have even performance. First note will be louder, other notes will be quieter, and now if you make your vocal, let's say, loud in the mix, your first note will be jumping out, second and third will be more or less good. If you put your vocal relatively quiet in the mix, first note will be okay, second and third note will be drowning in the mix. So that's why 300 milliseconds seems like makes a lot of sense, more than, let's say, majority of other options. Even though all these manuals and reviewers say, oh, it's so many good options, and they play smart and they choose random numbers because on their vocals actually it's not necessarily very dangerous to choose some other options. But on some best projects where you really can demonstrate that some settings absolutely not suitable, like our project in our lesson today, I'm gonna show you that other than first option, pretty no other option will be working for this vocal. Also, by the way, I forgot to mention that the Beatles vocals. So vocals on the Beatles recordings, and Beatles is considered to be the most known recording artist of all time, you know, in the history of recording. they use Fairchild as their main vocal compressor. From the other side, it's early 60s, late 60s, you know, when Beatles were performing, right? So you didn't have too many compressors over time. So definitely one of compressors you may have chosen was Fairchild compressor for sure. So this is why I say over here 300 milliseconds, good for dynamics. Let me show you other options for this vocal. So what I do, I put time constant in position 1, then I rotate threshold until I'm gonna see some indications on gain reduction meter. I create absolutely exactly the same performance like on LA2A, LA3A, 5 dB, usually 7 dB on people, 10 dB on very rare loud word pawn. So what I mean by this, your compressor not always gonna be doing 10 dB just for the word pawn. I compensate output volume over here.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
With these settings, and unfortunately it would be always like a bit happening with this vocal and Fairchild, LA2A definitely does better job because you cannot say that the beginning of the line is quieter than the end of the line on LA2A.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Plus minus, you know, but on Fairchild it's quite noticeable that it starts with quiet words, but somehow the end of the line has loud words.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
So it's like increasing, you know. So it can be very fast attack for the very first transient, so it triggers too much compression in the beginning. LA2A, as you know, has 10 milliseconds roughly as the attack time, not 0.2 milliseconds, you know. Anyway, Fairchild has this like thickness, density, but not really profound bottom ends. If LA2A sounds more like
Treating people.
treating people,
Treating people just.
this one a bit more like treating people instead of treating people. Micro difference, but definitely Fairchild is very unique. By the way, check my previous videos, I'm gonna keep the link in the description, about how ministers of Canada too busy killing animals so they don't perform their main duties fighting with the wildfires, all the smoke, and I explain why hunting is for cowards. Check it out, the previous video, only 5 minutes video. It's kind of like everything in one. It has some seems like tightness, because not as profound bottom end, but at the same time it has very warm low mid and seems like darker and bigger low end due to coloration, you know. Unfortunately, dynamically it's not performing too perfect because first was definitely quieter and then other words definitely louder. I would say if you divide this line in two halves, just treating people, everything kind of normal over there. And then second half, just like a separate consideration, just like pawn, two chess, also quite normal. But for some reason, first half quieter than the second half, you know.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Again, it can be not a big deal. If you like the tone of Fairchild, you can automate. You can use automation after compression and you're just gonna make second half of the line just quieter. But I just have to mention it as it's not as simple as on a LA2A or 1176. You just throw it there and it does something right. With Fairchild it's a little bit more capricious.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Pawn to chess, definitely sort of like increase in volume. Again, it's very special release curve, you know. It's not only about the timing, you know, because they don't have linear release curves. Another thing, it's a super soft knee compressor, but there is a special DC parameter which is over here. You can see if you put the screw all the way to the right, it would be super soft knee. It will be compressing all peaks below the threshold, absolutely. If you put the screw more like to the left, counterclockwise, you make it more like hard knee compressor. Of course, if it's a hard knee compressor, it would fluctuate even worse.
Treating people.
You know, it would be crazy. So you definitely need soft knee mode. Universal Audio offers you two modes. One is called California, is more like Universal Audio, they mean. And second one is this Ocean Way Studios, which is actually a studio built by Bill Putnam, Universal Audio founder. By default, it's this Bill Putnam setting, Ocean Way. Let's try California, but I have doubts if it will improve performance of this compressor.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Obviously, as it has more hard knee mode, we're gonna have less compression with the same threshold, the same input. So I readjust threshold and input.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Now pawn jumps out like crazy.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Now it's not right. In this case, I would not use this compressor at all. Let's try the softest it has. Softest knee. I readjusted gain threshold to have the same amount of compression. Pawn to chess still jumping out.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
So I kind of okay with settings of Bill Putnam.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Okay, good. So this is Fairchild. We're gonna say it or hear that this compressor definitely not as profound in low end, in the bottom end, as LA2A. Obviously, don't get me wrong, I don't have access to real analog Fairchild, but it's just statistics. I consider multiple emulations of LA2A and they all have tendency to be a bit more like on the bottom end, you know. And all emulations of Fairchild, at least 90% of them, tend to be just a bit more tight, but not thin, not flat, you know. So we're definitely gonna say not profound as LA2A. It's super colorful preamplifier, which is part of Fairchild. With all this extra saturation, like super colorful, it really make everything warm. So we're gonna say super colorful preamp. Just to make sure you understand, this compressor has parallel compression mode. This plugin has parallel compression. Parallel compression when you blend unprocessed, which means even more dynamic vocal, with processed, which is not perfectly evened out. So you're gonna have double fluctuations. So parallel compression has nothing to do with this test. Secondly, it has this like left, lat, right, vert sort of mode. In fact, it's like more like mid-side encoding, and you use left and right channel instead of like processing left and right, more like mid and side. Vocal, it's a mono sound. There is no side channel. It's just a mono waveform. So that's why, again, it has nothing to do with our test. Let's put time constant 2. It's 800 milliseconds. It means release time will be so longer that you're gonna have even more residual compression for every next note, and vocal will be performing worse. But who knows, maybe this kind of like pawn to chess, this part will be more under compression and maybe it will be not louder than the first half of the line. Let's try it out. And I know in advance, no. 318, it's already 800 milliseconds. People, 800 milliseconds, you know. So making it 500 milliseconds longer will not change anything. Actually, it will be holding maybe over compression of the first syllables too much. That difference between the beginning of a line and the end of a line will be even more. I set up again 5 dB on 318, 7 dB on people, and 10 dB on pawn to have a fair comparison. Check it out, dynamics. Now I don't like it. It starts to do this. Treating people.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Even worse performance.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Word chess like 3 times louder than word treating in the beginning of the line. Then we have settings 3 and 4. It would be crazy long releases, 2000 and 5000 milliseconds. They will not be working for this vocal, absolutely. 3. I readjusted the threshold to make sure again 5, 7, 10 decibels. Check it out.
Treating people just.
Treating people, even worse than 800.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Pawn to chess just completely off, completely jumping out. Position 4.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Now I kind of feel 4000 milliseconds, don't get me wrong, 4000 milliseconds, it's so long time that potentially you almost like don't compress anything other than all performance just by some amount down. What I mean by this, when you have like syllable, treating people just like pawn, you know, to chess, in this case, your submarine dives, but release curve not like this, not like this, not like this, but more like this. Because the whole line sounds almost like 4 seconds, you know. Which means if you compress, let's say, by 7 dB, next note will be compressed by 7 dB no matter if this note louder or quieter, it still roughly would be influenced by previous compression of 7 dB. And again 7 dB, 7 dB, 7 dB. So let's say if vocal originally was completely random in dynamics, for example, like this, you know, you're gonna have the same performance. You're still gonna have first note quieter than second and third quieter than fourth and so on, because release time doesn't try to stop compression and you don't have a chance to even out notes with each other. And that's why position 4 over here, as you can hear, sounds almost like without any compressor.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
Very raw. And with compressor, yes, some modifications, but very raw.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
Like those no sustain, you know, instead of like trading people, which under compression, it sounds more like trading people, just like you know, like sort of shorter notes, faster fade outs on the end of each note, so it's questionable. And again, if you ask me why then those settings were present, but it's 1950s. Who knew in 1950s what kind of releases you would need? Maybe you need everything just to be 7 decibels quieter when you print something on tape. It was no Logic Pro, Pro Tools or Cubase where you could make something quieter or louder or something. Compressors used for many different reasons, you know. Original sidechain in high taming highs on the late wave was invented not to create sibilance control and like a de-esser. It was because of distortion created by receivers and transmitters in TV production, in broadcasting. I'm originally from broadcasting field as a professional audio engineer, so some technologies were used for something which you don't even know why originally it was invented, you know. Plus, original manufacturer probably gave different variety of options what this compressor can do. And application-wise, then all other generations of other audio engineers in 70s, 80s, 90s finally recognize what really works and what's not, you know. How about position 5? Position 5.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
Position 5, as you can see, it's a shorter for transients release time. So every time when something much more exceeding the threshold, compressor sees it as a transient. So for the transient, release will be shorter. Then it sees some peaks continuing above the threshold, for example, like sustain of a note. It will be already like medium sort of notes, so it will create more like longer release, medium time for the body of notes. When peaks already gradually start to going down, like in the tail of notes, compressor will prolong release up to 10 seconds, 10,000 milliseconds, accommodating this slow, but it's actually very slow for performance like trading people, you know, so still very slow release time. So it's automatic release, program dependable, like they like to say. By the program, they mean waveform structure. So some program comes in and this computer sort of like analyzes incoming information, like a program, you know. So basically, it's sounding like this.
Treating people just like.
Treating people.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
Chess uncontrollable, almost much less compressed than previous notes.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
So chess very sort of dominant over the previous notes, you know, so strange behavior. And just imagine, ask yourself, I'm sure you saw this sort of demonstrations 1,000 times, like somebody on YouTube just rotating this time constant in position 5, 6, playing smart and saying, oh, look how good it sounds. As I always say, there is some projects where everything already evened out. It just sits in the mix already, and now no matter what kind of compressor you're gonna throw, it will sound alright, you know. So it's a polishing the gold bar. You can make a mistake, it's still a gold bar. You make a triple mistake, it's a gold bar. You make quadruple mistake, it's a gold bar. I don't play fool over here. I show you the vocal where your compressor should be set up really perfectly to tame dynamic. Position 6.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
After I change time constant, obviously we change amount of compression due to different reasons. Let's say longer release time, so you need to readjust threshold input output to make sure it's a consistent performance, a consistent test. I do it over here. I just save time not showing you all this after each changes because it would be like literally 5 hours video, For me it will be 15 hours recording, which is impossible to create. I quickly normalize everything. So in position 6, you have automatic release. On the longest tails, it will be up to 25 seconds. 25,000 milliseconds is the longest release on all compressors I ever seen. Let's listen to it.
Treating people just like.
But for the transients and shorter sort of spikes, probably release will be pretty short. And I believe just because of release time is 25 seconds, you cannot really recognize issues of this compressor because it just holds compression and holds and holds and holds. You cannot say like, oh, look at the note number 7, which is louder than note number 6. How you can say it if, let's say, compression all the time, just like 7 dB, 7 dB, 7 dB of compression for 25 seconds, while this line lasts for like 5 seconds. Listen to dynamics.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Pawn to chess, jumping out. But I would say, actually, surprisingly, maybe I already a bit tired on my ear, but constant 6 doesn't sound too bad. Of course, constant 1 sounded the best. There was only one issue, second half of the line louder than the first half. Notes with each other evened out. Now, not necessarily everything evened out, but overall performance sort of more or less, but in the ballpark.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
So this automatic release, probably due to much shorter release in the transients, somehow helps this vocal. Let's actually put this over here. Due to shorter release for short spikes, it may work for vocals. I noticed it as well back in the days. I commonly hated all positions other than 1, but sometimes I kind of noticed not too bad performance in position 6. So it's interesting. But guess what? What positions plugin manufacturers usually choose for their plugins based on Fairchild? Pretty never position 1 or 6. They put default setting somewhere, who knows. Being able to make great plugins doesn't mean you are able to really set up a compressor for the vocals, Whatever, it doesn't matter. The most important, it's a tool which allows us to tame our vocals, to make it sound warmer and everything, so we appreciate plugins. So LA to AA.
Treating people just like pawns and chess. Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Pawn definitely jumping out. LA to A does much better over there. Chess also a bit exaggerated in comparison to treating people, But I would say not too bad performance.
Treating people just like pawns and chess. Treating people just like pawns and chess.
It definitely has different structure of coloration. Where usually Fairchild compressors are popular? They popular on vocals, they popular on bass, and they popular on the master bass. As a master bass, after we finish models of compressor topic, we're gonna go to the next subject of dynamics, which is master bass compressors. Theory, techniques, hidden things, gems, something absolutely unique. You will be so grateful for this information. And we're gonna have models of master bass compressors. So now I'm not gonna talk about how this compressor performs on the whole song. We're talking about just compressor for either managing transient sustains or evening out vocal notes or bass notes or something like this. So definitely vocal, bass. In terms of plugins, first plugin, which was always available if you bought back in the day something like Apollo audio interface or accelerator, PCI Express card for those processors of Universal Audio Digital 2, UAD2, or satellite devices which you plugged with USB or with Thunderbolt. Make sure you don't make this mistake and don't invest in these super outdated processors. If you bought those devices, they gave you this sort of bundle for free, and one of plugins of this bundle was Fairchild Legacy. Universal Audio Legacy, no color without compression, which is absolute nonsense. With 20 tubes, if you don't compress anything but you regulate input-output, On Fairchild, you definitely get great enhancer, great coloration. Legacy didn't have this emulation, even though they said it's authentic emulation, With compression, odd harmonics, and EQ, if you measure with frequency analyzer, it's even visible on the frequency analyzer. On this plugin, you have a bit less lows, a bit less highs. Those like top end and very low end. 10 years later, Universal Audio updated their bundle of Fairchild, and this is the plugin. I was using this today. This is the updated version, right? So on this plugin, what happens? So 670, there is second version, mono version of Fairchild. By the way, it sounds literally different. 660 is brighter in Universal Audio. Without compression, you have quickly going down harmonics. So what I mean, you apply this compressor, you put no threshold, you play,
Treating people.
And then you can regulate input, gain more or less, In this case, you get different coloration structures. And what structure you get over there, you get quickly going down harmonics, but third anyway a bit like noticeably dominant, or at least tendency like to exaggerate third harmonic. But in general, all harmonics just gradually going down like on this picture, like this. This is fundamental tone and harmonics going down. With compression, going down harmonics. So you apply compression and just going down harmonics. EQ, you still get a bit less lows, a bit less highs, but not as prominent as on legacy plugins. So a bit more lows, a bit more highs, in comparison to legacy. But in comparison to the flat curve, which commonly associated with many compressors, you still get a bit less lows and a bit less highs. And this is where I want to give you one important side topic, because as you remember, when we learn models, it's not only about learning models. Each model brings to the table some nuances, some interesting subjects, some interesting topics. And now the topic is, if you hear this, roll-offs on the low end and on the high end. It depends on what instrument you work with. For example, human voice has fundamental tone in this song, for example. This guy has fundamental tone 275 cycles, which means he doesn't have naturally the low frequencies like 40 cycles or 50 cycles. So this roll-off of Fairchild mostly affecting this like very, very low end, but this vocal doesn't even have those low frequencies. So when you say it has a bit of roll-off, maybe it will be noticeable on the master bass or on the bass or something, but not on the vocal. You know what I mean? The same with high end. Vocal has sibilances, usually 6-7K fundamental tone and some harmonics. If you have, let's say, 7K sibilance, second harmonic will be 14, and the next harmonic, 21K, will be already above human ear frequency range. You're not gonna hear this third harmonic from sibilance. Only question is if this 14K will be affected a bit by this roll-off or not. So it's very cool. A lot of people for some reason think compressor just sounds like it sounds. If it has roll-off, let's say on the low end, then everything will sound thinner. But the question is if your instrument has frequencies in that range. Next Fairchild emulation I want to compare to this one is Waves, Puig Child. They went to famous Jack Joseph Puig to his studio. He has a Fairchild. They emulated it. I'm gonna be using Universal Audio in position 1 because I still believe it gets smoother sort of performance dynamically in comparison to 6. So I make sure it's 5, 7, 10. Then I go to Waves. Also time constant 1. It's an easy plugin to use in terms of you need to set up just left channel, right channel will translate the same settings to the right side because it's a linked mode. So what I do over here, crazy needles jumping so fast, no VU meters behave like this.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Waves definitely sound thinner. Universal Audio has more density in the low mid, more like ooh.
Treating people just like pawns and chess. Treating people just like pawns and chess.
And all this like on the top,
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
I'm not gonna say Universal Audio sounds perfect. It also has this a bit harsher sibilances and exaggeration on tones. Like vocal already has it, but Universal Audio adds up this like dirt to sibilances to sound like ch, s, s. But waves has this like constantly, not only on sibilances, even on vowels, on consonants, everywhere in between sibilances, you hear this a bit like some sort of a high frequency, sort of like coming exactly from waves. I don't like this tone.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
It's like fizzy sound. So what I'm saying over here, it has actually noise emulation as well. What I mean by this, they have this like 50 and 60 cycles. Even though according to measurement it's just some background noise, transformer emulation noise on the background, actually it's kind of noticeable in the performance. So without, it's kind of like
Treating people just like pawns and chess. Treating people just like pawns and chess.
definitely like, again, it's a subtle, but for my ear, for me, it's something what puts me a bit away from the sound. It's becomes somehow more artificial or something.
Treating people just like pawns and chess. Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Yeah, even though it's already dirty and noisy, even in off position with 60 cycles extra, it's even more noisy. You can try 50, you can try 60, it's still noisy. Without compression, second harmonic equals third, and they are both loud, like boosted. Other harmonics are odd ones. Let's compare universal audio. Quickly going down, but third is pushed. Waves, second equals third instead of third dominant. And other harmonics odd ones instead of gradually going down. With compression, which is probably more important because you're not probably always gonna be using Fairchild without compression, as majority of you didn't know this technique before this course, right? So majority of people use compressors for compression. So with compression, going down harmonics on universal audio, which is warm, and on waves also, interestingly, going down gradually harmonics. But sound-wise, tone-wise, they sound completely different, and EQ of Waves plugin doesn't have high drop, only low drop actually. Which is quite funny. Waves will sound brighter and with more modern top end than warm and smooth, pleasant universal audio Fairchild.
Treating people just like pawns and chess. Treating people just like pawns and chess.
I make Wave specifically maybe a little bit quieter, because if I make it louder, it will be literally jumping out by the upper mid.
Treating people just like pawns and chess. Treating people just like pawns and chess.
Yeah, universal audio wins hands down. Next compressor for Fairchild style compressor is IK Multimedia. Warm and darker, noticeable drop on the highs from 4K. It's the darkest compressor out of the bunch. It has natural roll off starting from 4K and slowly going towards 20K. Oh, it's so hot. Oh, this microphone cannot handle the force of my explanation. First of all, guys, let me clarify this thing for you once and forever. When somebody shows you even vocal, which already sits in the mix and maybe already compressed, or just vocalist performs very smoothly and nothing really loud or quiet, it's very easy to throw any wrong compressor with any wrong settings on this vocal, and vocal will be sounding fine in the mix. Instead, I use the project which really defines quality of the compressors. First of all, let me show you the project where I can put any compressor and it will sound exactly the same. By this, I'm gonna prove my point, and then I'm gonna show you the project, the systems, how to choose proper compressors and everything. It will be amazing class from A to Z, from Andrew to Zeleno. Every little minute is important in this video. Check it out. I wrote this song just for fun to compare microphones and preamps. First of all, it was a guitar project.
This is the test, this is the test, this is the test of preamplifier. This is the test, this is the test, this is the test of preamplifier.
Then I took a vocal from it and I created electronic music remix. Actually, I created another hip-hop beat with the orchestral instruments, but I'm gonna show you EDM version.
This is the test, this is the test, this is the test of preamplifier.
It has this part. This part. And I went to the streets and asked all my neighbors to sing along, and we did this. Now I'm gonna put a couple of compressors on this vocal, and you will not hear any improvement or any mistakes, because no matter what I'm gonna put on this vocal will be working for this mix. It's not really mixed yet, but I mean, in terms of vocal control, evening out notes, coloration wise, how it tightens up the vocal to put in a mix, no matter what kind of compressor and settings it will have, it will be the same. This is how majority of YouTubers fool you. They put whatever they want. Everything sounded good before processing. They put some processing, sounds kind of fine as well. But with the smart faces, they make it look like, oh, it's a really smart move over here, you know what I mean? Compressor 1. Compressor 2. Compressor 3. See, in this mix, it absolutely doesn't matter which compressor you will choose, because vocal already evened out, it has good recording quality, it has tone, it has density, it has clarity, so I cannot make any mistakes. So I can only fool you by like now making a smart face and like saying, let's check the project, this is how my settings is set up over here. Fairchild style compressor. Digital. I can change the tag. I can change from feedback style to feed-forward compressor. I can use low ratio. I can use side chaining. I can use longer release. I made release 5 times longer, and it almost sounds in the same way. So this is the first point. They lie to you. They show you something what absolutely is not relying on the compressor type and settings. They rotate all these knobs promoting plugins, but in fact, it's really not what it's all about. So for this vocal, let's be honest. Let's say if I go with LA2A, not by LA2A, but LA2A from Universal Audio. This one.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
Good control of the word pawn. Pawn is not jumping out, so compressor holds dynamics. The only issue on the ends of different syllables. For example, treating people.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
A bit more like you know, which you can try to tame with the screw on this LA2A. The problem is the more you rotate, the more the fluctuations in dynamics happens on this compressor. Also, it's not as clear on the top end. It still has some high frequency dirt, because what we already learned in previous lessons was the difference between this and real analog LA2A for $5,000 over there. The real one doesn't have high harmonics. This one has. It gives this like on the top, So basically, analog one sounds like this, a real one.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
So this is the plugin. It sounds like.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
Especially on and everything. Analog one, exactly with the same settings, would be softer, smoother on the top end, and a bit more density in the low mid, more like For this dirty vocal, it works better, because it tames some dirt of high is already present in the recording, and I kind of compensate from the other side. I put more density and warmth to the bottom end, and everything start to be a bit more like, instead of bright and thin, a bit like warmer, and high is not as prominent anymore, and everything like clearer.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
Much more pleasant. Plugin.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
Plugin definitely much more like it doesn't have this density in the low mid. But in comparison to this plugin, we found out today that Fairchild from Universal Audio
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
still has a bit more like this kind of like attacking transients, which is a bit too much for the short attack Fairchild compressor. It's not supposed to be doing those like two chess, like t.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
For example, Midnight from Acoustic Audio smooth out actually transients pretty well.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
It's still kind of bright and prominent and still very colorful with saturation on the top as well as Universal Audio. But it's not those like sharp, sudden punch in some transients, But to be honest, so Universal Audio has worse performance than LA2A in the second half of the line. It doesn't hold dynamics, treating people quieter than pawn 2 chess on Fairchild.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
With the Midnight in a twilight setting, which is more like original Fairchild, in the shortest attack time, we found out that this vocal sounds, if you're lazy and you rewind to this particular part of this video, you will not understand what I'm talking about. I explained all these little nuances step by step in all these subjects in this video. So make sure you not rewind to this comparison. I already explained all this, so this one sounds definitely more equal in volume.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
This one still jumps out on the pawn word. Pawn sounds especially exaggerated.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
It has openness and brightness, which is actually not necessarily associated with Fairchild. Even though this plugin quite good, in my opinion, it sounds kind of a bit more modern, on the modern side. Even Universal Audio sound seems like a bit more warm.
Treating people just like pawns and shares. Treating people just like pawns and shares.
But Midnight definitely silkier on transients instead of like treating people. Midnight sounds more like treating people, like polishing, more polishing. Still saturating. The worst performance coming from waves on this vocal. If vocal was completely muddy and dark, it may be working. But it's the thinnest. It doesn't have this masculine voice, male voice, this like which is chest resonator actually. And it sounds thin and very bright, so lack of lows and too much highs.
Treating people just like pawns and shares.
Thin, If I make it louder, this brightness and upper mid will be even more prominent. This one is much warmer. It has a roll off on the top end after 4K and above and more and more and more. So it has less and less and less highs after 4K. So it works for this vocal better because it tames all these two crazy spiky sibilances on the top. Of course, you can combine waves, let's say, with the de-esser, but all these high frequency harmonics will not disappear because of de-esser. You're just gonna hide the problem. This one simply doesn't exaggerate all these highs on its own, you know. So it makes everything warmer and more packed in the mix. No presence.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
It doesn't mean sound completely dark or muffled. I mean, vocal simply doesn't jumping out in your face, you know, from the mix.
Treating people just like pawns and chess.
So this is how you choose compressors for something. You know performance of the source, what's wrong with this, what you try to change in the performance, right? To even out, to fight with this like people, you know. You try to tame this like people. You want to compress it. You need special release curve to keep this like down, you know. And then you try to make pawn to chess quieter, for example, because those louder words in the performance. And then you check disadvantages of the tools, checking what the tool does to your performance. So instead of saying, oh, plugin from Universal Audio Fairchild is the best vocal compressor, it's nonsense. It really depends on how your vocal sounds originally. For example, if your performance is muddy and dark, bright and noisy compressors can be beneficial because it fixes all this muddiness and make everything more open. If your performance like this, more open and noisy, you may prefer compressors which tame in highs, but still depends because they can perform dynamically incorrectly or making too much saturation to some frequency ranges. So you really need to think what's the source and what's the tool and how they come together. With considering all these advantages they create. This is what I teach in models topic. But in general, would I go with Fairchild compressor for this vocal? Probably not, because Fairchild compressor first of all saturates the signal quite a lot. When something already dirty, you don't want more. Let's say you have a bit salty potato, right? Maybe it's already a bit too salty or on the boundary. You don't put extra salt for salty potato, you know what I mean? The same over here, it's already saturated, it's already noisy and dirty. I need something much more clear, I would say, for this particular vocal. From the other side, if vocal was clear, not saturated at all, kind of flat and thin and stuff, Fairchild compressor would be a great choice, especially, but if recording from the other side like dark and muddy, you would need something brighter, maybe waves, which doesn't have this like density in low mid and more open highs. From the other side, if you're recording opposite, like a bit thinner and you want warmer, bigger, nicer sound, you probably would go with something juicier, darker, warmer like this. Pretty balanced, I would say, performance coming from Midnight. Not too bad Universal Audio, but for my taste, it has strange attack and transient, so not polishing enough or something. So my point is, after you learn model topic, you know different type of compressors, you know what to expect, you apply, you compare. If something not right, you know why exactly it's not right, you know. It's amazing, it's the deepest knowledge you ever can find. So the point is, if you want dynamics control, I would go with something more flexible like 1176 to control dynamics. I already showed in lesson number 16 and 17 that 1176 did pretty great job on this vocal. LA2A a bit more capricious, but it captures pawn and chess. But again, what I can show you in this short video, it's hours and hours and hours of knowledge from lesson 9 to lesson 15 on all subjects of compressors, and from lesson 16 to lesson 23 on all classic models with all their hidden things, multiple extra subjects connected to this models topic, and comparisons and battles between plugins where I demonstrate harmonic contents, frequency responses, performance-wise how this compressor behave, what to listen to, what to notice. I mean, it's a gem, check it out. Free videos is just to get you interested. Real education is full-blown lessons. How to buy full lessons, read in the description or in the first pinned comment.